Welcome to Cross to Cross Conversations. I'm your host, Monica, and here at Cross to Cross, I believe every voice matters. Every story deserves to be told, and the conversations we're told not to have are often the very ones we need the most. This is a space for honest conversation. Real stories, hard questions, uncomfortable truths, and yes, we will even have some fun sometimes. At life's crossroads, those moments where you're forced to choose between staying silent or speaking up, that is where your voice has power. If you've been silenced, dismissed, or told your story doesn't matter, this podcast is for you. No topic is off limits, no story is too messy, no voice goes unheard. This is Cross to Cross Conversations where silence meets voice. Come on in and let's have this conversation. Welcome to Cross Conversations. I am your host, Monica, and today we're actually going to talk about cults. That's right, you heard it. We are actually going to talk about cults. I know you heard before about you may have said your friend is in a cult simply because they're not able to do the things that you would like them to do. But today we have Peter Young. Peter Young is actually someone who is actually in a cult. That's right, you heard me. He is going to tell us his story about actually being in a cult and what his experience, his bio. Peter Young, he's a storyteller first and foremost. Peter is the author of 3 books: the Amazon best-selling memoir, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, and the first 2 books in the Thomas Connor series, The Blue Team and Wardrobe of the Wolf. Prior to his writing career, Peter was a sports broadcaster for over 20 years, telling stories of great athletes all over the world while working for CBS, ESPN, OLN, and other networks. Welcome to Peter. Now, I must say, Peter, a broadcaster versus telling your story about a cult, those are like different extremes. Share however you would like. I just thank you for joining us today and share your story, sir.
Monica, thank you very much. Yes, you are correct. Doing play-by-play for a basketball or football game is a little different than telling my story about the journey in and out of a tiny but destructive religious cult. And the fascinating thing is, as I share my story with you and your audience, keep in mind that a lot of this story occurred while I was a sports broadcaster, while I was traveling around the country and on networks calling games on TV, certainly not famous or well known, but still someone in the public eye. And no one had any idea what was going on, which is really one of the lessons from my story is that tiny cults are out there, they exist, and they can hide easily within society. So that's one of the reasons why I share my story. So I unwittingly joined this little cult when I married the love of my life about 29 years ago. I call her Paige in my book, Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger, but she was born into this little cult. The cult leader was a guy named Uncle Robert. He wasn't related to any of us. That's what we all called him. He was actually born and raised in Syria and it doesn't look like any of us. I'm 6'5". My wife was blonde hair, blue eyes. We're all kind of Northern European in our looks and heritage. And, Robert was, kind of short and portly and bald, olive complexion and black hair. And he met my former in-laws at a tiny seminary in Fresno, California in the early 70s. And it all started then, a very parasitic, one-sided relationship. So again, when Paige was born, her whole upbringing, Uncle Robert was the expert on everything. And so I knew of Uncle Robert even before I got engaged to Paige. In fact, even before I met her. I was working at the local ABC affiliate, little old Pocatello, Idaho. So I was on the, every night, 6 to 10 o'clock. And a friend of mine had, knew Paige, and you couldn't miss her. She was, 6 foot long, tall, blonde hair, beautiful woman. And I didn't know who she was. My friend said, "Oh, that's Paige. But be careful, Peter. Her family has this really weird family guru." That was before I ever met her. So then I met her a few weeks later at a singles Bible study of all places. And we started dating right away, fell in love right away. About a month later, I met her father. Now, Monica, I was about 90% all in, knew I was going to marry this woman after about 2 weeks, but I knew I needed to meet her father and this Uncle Robert because she talked about him all the time. So about a month later, I go up to northern Idaho where her parents live. It's a long drive, so I go to the bathroom. I'm a guy. I stand up to pee. When I come out, my future father-in-law is standing right there in the doorway. And it's really weird. He's standing really close and he says, I heard you go to the bathroom. Okay, that was weird. In our house, all the men need to sit to pee. Wow, that's really weird. And then he said, it's cleaner, reduces splashing. And then he said the phrase that I would hear hundreds of times over the next 20 years. Uncle Robert taught us that. And if Uncle Robert taught you anything, it was unassailable. You could not question it, which is one of the traits of cult leaders. They hate questions. So I, of course, didn't say anything at that moment. I just kind of let it go. And I thought, okay, he's a little odd, this guy, but, harmless. And then I eventually met Uncle Robert about 4 months later. And then, Paige and I got married. And so over our nearly 20 years of marriage, well, it was over 20 years, we had 5 children. So we had our first one like 10 months later after we got married. And then we had another one. And for the first few years of our marriage, we lived in Idaho and Uncle Robert lived in Southern California. His real name was Robert Booty. He had a fairly normal American wife that he had married. His 2 sons and their families, but they never were really involved in the cult. And I thought I was the best husband ever. I thought she was the best wife ever. I thought we were raising the bar for all of Christendom in terms of what a marriage should look like. So yes, I was a little arrogant, but I just loved my wife. Thought we had a great marriage. I thought we communicated well. And then one of the first real red flags was shortly after 9/11. And I grew up in northern New Jersey, so I had high school classmates who were in the buildings during 9/11. I had a classmate who was widowed on 9/11. So that moment was poignant for all of us, but it really kind of hit home for me. And we would have these conferences. So we would go to northern Idaho to my in-laws, and Uncle Robert would drive up with his buddy. Think of Batman and Robin. If he was Batman, his Robin, his buddy was Michael. We called him Brother Michael. Okay, weird guy. And they would always drive together. And the conferences were us sitting around in the living room listening to him talk for hours and hours on end with his theology and philosophy. And some of it was brilliant, some of it was bizarre. Another important point for your listeners is that cult leaders don't automatically start right away with utter nonsense and lies. They start with the truth, and then they slowly, subtly pervert it. So Uncle Robert would share us from the Bible, and he knew the Bible. Then he would give each verse his little particular spin, interpretation. And then 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you're like, wow, how did we get here? And I would assume that's that way for a lot of cult leaders. So back to 9/11. This one night at the conference, he said, Roosevelt was a Drew and Truman was a Drew and 80,000 people died on 9/11. And he kind of spit it out. There's a lot of vitriol towards Jews. And listen, I grew up in a melting pot in northern New Jersey, and we all made fun of each other. I had Italian friends and Jewish friends and Catholic friends, and we were kids, but we made fun of each other. This was different. This was dark. And I remember telling my wife that night, I said, honey, I don't think this guy is who you think he is. He's dangerous, and I don't think we should have anything to do with him. I was scared, a little unnerved. She listened, and nothing ever came of it. I never pushed it, never pressed it. I should have. And I look back, hindsight can be 20/20. It's not guaranteed. But at the time, we only had the 2 children. Again, we ended up having 5. Would she have left me then? I don't know. But I remember for the first few years of our marriage, I knew he wasn't going away. I kind of wished he would. We didn't see him much. We'd see him once or twice a year, but Paige would talk to him on the phone almost every day on the cell phone. And she would talk to him about lots of things. And I kind of just thought the guy was nuts. But I largely kept that to myself. So I was the proverbial frog in the pot of boiling water. I went along to get along with my wife. So that over the years, his control got stronger and stronger. His crazy ideas were shared more and more often. And all of his ideas were immediately and 100% adopted by my wife and my in-laws. And when I say our cult was small, it was maybe at most 15 to 20 people. It would have been my wife and I, my in-laws, Uncle Robert, one of Paige's brothers. The rest of Paige's family was completely ostracized and shunned because they didn't follow Uncle Robert. My family, so my brothers, my parents, my sister-in-laws, they really had no idea what was going on. They lived on either coast. Again, we lived in Idaho. So they knew of Uncle Robert, but they had no clue about the inner workings. And some of the inner workings were around the same time where I heard about his idea of 9/11 was that he called casinos the true churches in America. and that the churches we all go to on a Sunday are just a complete waste of time because only he knew the true gospel. And if you go into a casino, you could be blessed by the Lord, regardless of your success in life or your education, etc. To which I would say, okay, our God is a big God, he can do anything. But I see people worshiping money in a casino. I don't see them worshiping the Lord. And again, when my father-in-law told me this, I said, oh, Peter, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything, because I knew he would defend it with his life because Uncle Robert told him. And then, of course, my wife adopted it. And I just kind of thought it was crazy. And then they would go to the casino and he would call it his office. And they would call it the office because that's where he would go. And as the years went on, there was a lot of cognitive dissonance I had. And it's not illegal to be weird, to be odd, to be narcissistic. And so, being in a cult or being a cult leader is not against the law. It is very abusive. It's very emotional, mental, and spiritually abusive. Thank the Lord there was no physical or sexual abuse in our little cult. And oh, by the way, during all this, we would have never called it a cult. Nobody knows they're in a cult. They only know they were in one. No one ever knowingly joins a cult. It's always something else. It's something better. Uncle Robert would have been never considered as a cult leader when we were in it. He was always a brilliant pastor, servant of the Lord, whatever you want to call it. It's never called a cult, never referred to that much, or something like that. So over the years, then I would ask all these questions, and instead of getting a good answer, I would get, Peter, why are you so stupid that you don't understand me? And every time this would happen, I would be further and further diminished in the eyes of my wife. So we go from 2 children to 3 to 4 to 5. His control increases. We go to these conferences. They're really crazy. I'll give you another example of the craziness of the conferences. My wife left me in 2017. In the last few years of the conferences and being in the cult, it really ratcheted up in terms of the bizarreness of it. At the 2016 conference, which again is just us sitting in a living room listening to Uncle Robert, he went on and on about the hyena, the laughing hyena in Africa. And in that pack, the female that has given birth several times is the dominant animal, not the male. And the female hyena, after it has given birth several times, develops a fleshy appendage that basically looks like a penis, and it's bigger than the male's. And so then that female is dominant, then the male hyenas subserviently lick the groin of the female. Rather disgusting, but this is nature. What made it really disgusting was that Uncle Robert then kind of correlated this or applied this to the dominant story in America in 2016, which was Trump versus Clinton, and said that Hillary Clinton was the epitome or the embodiment of the female hyena. And if she were elected president, the leaders of the world would subserviently come and lick her groin, which is obviously disgusting, but that shows you where his mind was at. And 3 of my kids at the time were under 10 years old, and they're in the living room listening to this. And whatever was inappropriate for any other human to say, either to my wife or to my kids or anything, was never inappropriate for him because he was Uncle Robert. He could say and do whatever he wanted. So then, around that time, just to share with you the depth of the brainwashing, we had 5 kids. We had talked about having a 6th. And Uncle Robert had 2 sons, and those sons married and had granddaughters. Well, my wife came to me and had this burning desire to have another child, but not for me. She wanted to be a surrogate and provide Uncle Robert with a male heir to continue his bloodline, his DNA. Because in her mind and in the mind of all the adults in the cult, the only thing preventing World War III was Uncle Robert and his brilliance. He was that important, his mission that important. He was that brilliant. And it was just unimaginable for her to see a world where Uncle Robert's DNA and bloodline did not continue. Because again, he had granddaughters, not grandsons. And she was around 40 at this time, and I was repulsed by the idea. I said, honey, what happens if you have a daughter? Would you do it again? She says, yes, as many times as I have to. Well, thankfully, it didn't happen. But then it really kind of further drove the wedge in between she and I to where, our marriage was not doing well. And I was, terrified of having my family, my marriage break up. But she was drawing closer and closer to Uncle Robert. She was showing less and less respect to me, hardly any respect really at this point. So she started to refer to herself as Abigail. So I had to read the story about Abigail in the Bible because I'd read the Bible now, I think 6 times by that point, cover to cover. And in the Bible, you may remember the story of Abigail. She has the drunken, surly husband named Nabal, which translates into a fool. And so if she's Abigail, I'm Nabal, and I don't hardly ever drink. I've been drunk since my college days. And then in the Bible, Nabal is struck dead by the Lord, and Abigail marries King David. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who King David is in this story. And I was shocked and stunned by this. And so around that time, at another one of our conferences, we all shared our testimony. I had been saved. I had repented. I'd realized I was a sinner. I grew up in a Christian home, Christian parents. We went to church. I went to the summer camps, which I know doesn't make you a believer, but I did become a believer in my teenage years. I was baptized. I was not perfect. I was a saved sinner. But I altered my testimony. We all shared our testimony, except Uncle Robert. He didn't share his. We all shared our testimony, and mine was really tailored so that Paige and Uncle Robert would believe me because I knew they doubted my faith. And I should back up a little bit to say that one of the key attributes of a cult leader is they try and act as a gatekeeper to God. And in the Christian faith, you know that that is only the role of Christ. We go right to Christ. Christ is the only way to salvation. There is no other gate. And Uncle Robert tried to set himself up as a gate before Christ, which is completely unbiblical. And so he convinced Paige to doubt her faith even before we were married. And that's where the title of my book comes from, by the way. It's a fascinating story. I'll let you read it. And then about a year or two later, Uncle Robert convinced my father-in-law, who was about 60 at the time, that he was a demonic fraud all these years. He wasn't saved. So then he became saved through Uncle Robert. And then a year later, supposedly my mother-in-law was also convinced that she was a demonic fraud. And he exorcised demons from her that shouted like a horse when they left her, whatever that sounds like. And then she was saved. So all the adults in our little cult had been quote unquote saved by Uncle Robert, except me. So when I shared my testimony in the summer of 2016, my wife didn't believe it, Uncle Robert didn't believe it. So I finally caved. I thought to myself, maybe there's some elemental truth of the Christian faith I missed my whole life. And I'm in my mid 40s at this point. And really, in the back of my mind, I knew that was false. Monica, I really deep down knew it. And I was largely doing this just to try and salvage my marriage. So I caved and allowed myself to be really brainwashed. And that started about a 2 year period where I really was mostly all in and brainwashed. But Paige didn't believe it. So then a year later, we had another conference. She still doubted my faith. They all did. So I tried to be saved by Uncle Robert several times, and it was never enough. So right when Donald Trump was going to get inaugurated in January of 2017, she left me. She left the marriage, and then she and Uncle Robert went to DC for 2 weeks to kind of take part in the festivities. And he would go to DC and share his pearls of wisdom with, Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Fed, and senators and congressmen. And again, attribute of a cult leader, a common one is grandiose sense of self-admission. And Uncle Robert had that box checked big time. So it was almost like a symbolic honeymoon between those two. And I don't think anything, physical or sexual was going on at all. I sure hope not. And I don't think that, and I'm not trying to insinuate that. But I think symbolically it just showed that she left me to draw closer to him. So around this time, I'm devastated. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I wasn't suicidal, but I was an absolute wreck. I knew my marriage was falling apart. And now my kids are being taught that I'm the devil. So you may think, well, wait a minute, what's going on? So I told all the children, when they found out we were, splitting, I said, I'm sorry. I took all the blame. I love you and I love your mother. And when Paige found out that I told the kids that, she said, why did you tell them you love me? And I said, because it's true. And she said, no, it's not. You only thought you loved me. Well, that was a big problem because if the kids know daddy still loves mommy, why did mommy leave? But Paige was never going to allow that to happen. So when she left me, she took the three youngest kids with her to Idaho. The two oldest stayed with me. We had moved to Montana by this time. They were in college and in high school, so she didn't want to disrupt their schooling. So then she and Uncle Robert embarked on this vicious campaign of parental alienation, where they taught the children that I was the devil, Satan, a sorcerer, an alien, a fraud, a liar, an abuser, and most importantly, a sperm donor and merely a bloodline. And I remember Uncle Robert and Paige sending me emails around this time that I really had no parental qualities other than those possessed by an animal with its offspring, and that I needed to stop trying to imprison my children in the biological prison of DNA. Because in other words, that's all I brought to the table. as a dad, not really a true father. And I remember thinking, well, wait a minute. 2 years ago, Uncle Robert's DNA and sperm was so precious that Paige wanted to be a surrogate and to continue it. And now they're saying these things about me. So even though I was, a shadow of a man, I had been beaten down by my wife and Uncle Robert. I was walking on eggshells, scared of my own shadow. I really didn't stand up to her. She wore the pants, all of it. I mean, I was, um, I was really broken. And but I knew that that was wrong, that that was evil. And so I never had one single road to Damascus type moment. That was really one of a several that I had that year in 2017. So when she left, and now I didn't have access to my kids, they're being taught that I'm the devil. They were taught that the fifth commandment of the Bible, to honor thy father and mother, didn't apply to me because it only applied to fathers that love their children and love the mother. And they were taught that that wasn't me. So my family knew none of this, my parents and brothers and sister-in-laws, nor did any of my community members and friends here in Montana. So, about 4 months after she left, again, I'm barely alive. I finally reached out to friends and family, and they immediately surrounded me, supported me, loved me, and they saw the problem immediately. I mean, Monica, takes 5 minutes, right? And you could tell what the problem is. And at the time, I'm still thinking the only chance I have to save my marriage and family is Uncle Robert. When everybody around me knew, Peter, the only reason you are in this situation is because of him. Now, I do take full responsibility for not fulfilling my role as husband and father and protecting my wife and kids from him. That is where I failed. So the veil was lifted. The Lord really opened my eyes and ears to the truth. It took at least a year for me to really see, even though I'd only been brainwashed for about two, to see that it was a cult, that he had been a cult leader, and that I was saved, that really I was saved at the cross 2,000 years ago. And I never lost it. I had been blinded by that truth. And even though I'd been convinced by Robert that he said I was incapable of receiving salvation, that I was inhabited by a legion of demons, like the man in Luke chapter 8 in the Bible. And of course, Paige is believing this. My in-laws are believing this. If Uncle Robert said it, well, then Peter must be inhabited by a legion of demons. Of course, we have to get the children away from him because he's demonic. He's the devil. And that this was just all wicked nonsense by a man trying to put me and squash me under his thumb for the purposes of control. And he did have a lot of control over us because cult leaders use isolation, paranoia, and secrecy to control their members. And, we would leave church after church over our marriage because, Paige would hear the pastor. She would call Uncle Robert on the cell phone. Of course, the pastor was wrong, so we had to leave that church. We did that a number of times. And then we were out on the street corners, proselytizing and sharing the message of Uncle Robert. We heard several times, don't cast your pearls before the swine. So we really kept it quiet. We circled the wagons around him and didn't share much about Uncle Robert. We were taught we couldn't ask him specific questions on the cell phone, like where he was. We couldn't say certain words on the cell phone because, of course, the powers that be were always listening and a threat to Uncle Robert. We had to shred our trash, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how it happened. That's how we really became so vulnerable and isolated, is because of his control. It was on purpose. And so, in kind of short, in wrapping up, you know, I became vulnerable, and people become vulnerable to false teachers or cult leaders by a number of ways. My vulnerability was that I was married and I loved my wife and I wanted to save my marriage. And she respected and adored the man, and I knew he wasn't going away, and that reverence she had wasn't going away. And so I thought in my mind, the only thing I could do was just kind of stick around and survive. And that made me vulnerable. I will also say this, your audience knows that the body of believers, right? The fellowship we have with Christ, with other believers. If I cut my thumb off, I'm not going to die. My thumb will die, but I won't. I was like that little thumb. I was cut off from the larger body of believers to where the only voice that I heard and trusted, along with my wife and in-laws, was this one little narcissistic short guy from Syria. There was no other people that I really trusted that knew their Bible, maybe not as well, but certainly they knew their Bible. And there was no one to say, hey, wait a minute, Peter. He said, what? He said casinos are the true churches in America? Can you explain that? And I didn't have that in my life. Once I finally got it, then really the Lord was able to open my ears and get my attention. And then when I read my first book on cults, I thought, oh, it was was bad culture. It was a bad group. It was wicked. It was inappropriate, but it wasn't a cult. And then Monica, I'm telling you, I read my first book on cults and I highlighted like half the book. And if our little cult or our little group wasn't a cult, cults don't exist. I mean, it was a cult. And so, thank the Lord again, there was no physical or sexual abuse, but cults are abusive to children and to adults, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. And so I share my story as a cautionary tale to others because you do not want to experience the journey in and out of a cult. And the Lord can use our pain. The Lord can use our tragedies and experiences to help others and to grow us. I'm a million times stronger now. And I don't say that arrogantly because I just told you how I really messed up my life and just ruined it. But I'm stronger now because of what the Lord has taught me. And I don't rely on a family guru. I don't walk around on eggshells around a wife I'm afraid of and always try and get her opinion. I go straight to the Lord. Abba, Daddy, help me with this. Can I get discernment, please? James chapter 1. I ask the Lord for wisdom and he gives it to me and I believe. And so I have experienced all the pain. I don't anymore. Now I have the wisdom. And I try and help people just to learn from my experience so they don't have to experience what I did and other children as well. You know, my children have been through a lot. It's a mixed bag. With several of my children, it's great. They see it, they know the truth, they love their mother, but they also know what happened. They're all very aware of how wicked Uncle Robert was. But with some of the children, there's a lot of work to be done. And I always say parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. And so I hold out hope and I pray for my children that one day, those that I don't have a good relationship with today, that we will eventually have a loving, respectful father-son, father-daughter relationship.
Wow. Okay. Wow. As I stated earlier, I did take the time to purchase your book, but I haven't had a chance to read it. I will read it. I cannot even imagine. You had so many crossroad moments here, so many different dynamics that you had to experience. I just wanted to make sure I understood before I start my series of questions, right?
Mhm.
Um, because I do have a few. If I understood you correctly, you said that when you met Paige, she was already involved with the cult. That you didn't know it was a cult, but she was already involved.
Correct.
At that point, what did you understand about who this uncle was?
Well, great question. Very little. Um, I remember I'd heard about the Weird Family Guru from a buddy of mine named Gary. We were in the gym working out. I can remember where it is to this day. And because I didn't even know her name, I just start describing her. It's like, oh, I know who that is. That's Paige, but be careful. They got this weird family guru. And then I met her like, I don't know, a couple of weeks later at the singles Bible study. And then when we went on our first date, we went out to dinner. She started talking about Uncle Robert. And in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, I bet you that's the weird family guru. And at that moment, I didn't say anything. And so what I learned of him was strictly from her over the next few months. And I remember telling her, even though I'd never met the guy, the way you talk about him is really weird. And it was. And I think that's probably the introduction for a lot of us. Is that instead of just going to meet the cult leader, you might be talking to a friend or a loved one, and they talk about this person. And we probably all feel the same thing. Wow, that sounds weird, uncomfortable, right?
So how did she explain him to you at that time? So when you were like, it sounds weird, and you're sensing it, right? Clearly,
Yep.
your discernment is working.
Right.
But how did she explain it?
She would have never used the word cult or cult leader. She would have never used the word guru. And I didn't tell her what my buddy Gary had said. She
Right.
would have talked about, just a family friend, a mentor, father
Good.
in Christ, all of these things like that, right? I will say, again, the title of the book is based on this fascinating event. So the title of my book is Stop the Tall Man, Save the Tiger. And it comes from, and again, I don't want to divulge too much because it's absolutely the craziest, most bizarre thing. Paige had a dream that I believe the Lord gave her shortly before we met. She had graduated from ISU, Idaho State University, got two master's degrees. She was baptized, and Uncle Robert didn't do it, drove him nuts. She's on her own, she's dating, she's becoming more independent. And for Uncle Robert, the short little guy that had like virtually no outward success, Paige gave him instant cachet. She walks in the room and everybody knows it. So if Uncle Robert can convince this woman to follow him, well, now in the eyes of others, Uncle Robert is a person of importance. So she was always his most important convert or follower. She has a dream. And in the dream, I believe the Lord is warning her about Uncle Robert. She writes him, and then he writes her this crazy long 23-page letter that she gets shortly after we met for the first time. And I didn't know about this. Then, about 2 months later, she lets me read the dream letter. And I thought it was crazy. Again, it's 23 pages long, it's bizarre. And in it, he is able to twist it on its head, completely change the meaning to where the dream supposedly means that she's not saved, she's not a believer, she thought she was, she's only a fraud, and he uses it then to get her to doubt her faith, and then he saves her. This is right before we got engaged. So, thus, when I said earlier, she was the first one that went through this process of, well, I thought I was a Christian, but I really wasn't until Uncle Robert showed me I wasn't. And we all went through that. Every single one of us went through that. And that really is the most wicked thing that he did to where,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because he put himself in place of God, and we already know we can't do that. So question. So you said she was baptized. So she was actually in church first, in a true church first.
yeah,
Did she get
yeah,
baptized in church? So she had knowledge of who God is and who Jesus is and what he's done,
correct.
was baptized, basically professing her
Mhm.
confession
Right,
of who
right,
Jesus is.
right.
And I believe in your story also, sorry, I have a page full of notes. And
That's
I believe
okay.
in your story also, you said while you were speaking that you yourself had read the Bible at least 6 times by a certain point.
Yep, correct.
And clearly, when you think about it, when you went into the relationship with Paige, you already felt that something wasn't right, but you liked her. You continued, you married her, you had children. And then you said here that your vulnerability was marriage because you loved your wife and you wanted to save the marriage. So
Right.
basically, you continued.
Right. In
So
other
to,
words, it sounds weird to say I was vulnerable because I was married. What I mean by that is a narcissist and a cult leader like Uncle Robert can, like water, find the weak point in anything, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Find your weak point, right?
mm-hmm,
So, like if your weak point is you love your dog or whatever, right? Or you love your child,
mm-hmm.
that person will find a way to put that in danger. And
Right.
that,
It's manipulation.
correct. Thank
It's
you. That's,
witchcraft.
yeah,
It's manipulation. So he
yeah,
used it. And so you're saying basically that was a weak spot for you because you loved your wife. That's not a bad thing. You're supposed to
right,
love your wife. You're
right.
supposed to uh, protect your wife, and we'll talk about that because you said you failed because you didn't protect your friends and family, and I put a star next to that. But so you covenant is important.
Mhm,
Covenant, you know how God looks takes covenant, right?
mhm.
And so the covenant of marriage is very important. So yes, we called it a vulnerability, but I get exactly what you're saying. Vulnerable because you did feel the way that you did about your wife and your family, then he was able to use that in a manipulative way to get you to stay.
Correct. And really what I should have done is, as a loving husband said, sweetheart, it's either him or me. Um,
But
this
do you
man,
think she would have chosen you?
I don't know.
Ultimately, she divorced you. So
Right.
would she have chosen you even if you did say that?
That's the million-dollar question, and I have no idea. Because again, when I look back, people will say, well, would you marry her all over again? Even with all the horrible stuff she has said and done, my answer is a resounding yes, because otherwise we wouldn't have our 5 children. Which, oh, by the way, my kids asked her that at one point after she left me, and she said, honey, or son, whatever it was, whoever asked it, you would still be here if I didn't marry your father. You would just look differently. Again, trying to completely erase me from the life and lives
So
of my children.
in this moment, how do you feel about this situation? In this moment, if you had to give your raw feeling, not edited, how are you feeling in this moment about that situation?
Well, I've moved on. I mean, if maybe that's what you're getting at. I certainly love and miss the woman I married 29 years ago. That woman is gone. That family is gone. So I don't look at it like a tragedy anymore. With some of my children, it certainly is, and that breaks my heart because that is still ongoing. She's moved on, she's remarried. I have
Oh,
emotionally, moved on as well. And so when I share this, yes, it's very vulnerable, it's very raw, but I also share it from a point of view of, hope I'm explaining myself correctly. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt me to share this.
yes.
I
Because
share
you're
it not
healed.
to, I share it not to try and keep peeling back the scab and the wound. I share it from a position of, I hope others can learn from this.
Yes, and that's exactly where I want to go. So, um, I opened up by saying that we hear a lot of time, oh, they're in a cult. And sometimes, people use that rather loosely. And there are people out there who are absolutely in a cult. And you said, if I'm quoting you accurately, you said you don't know you're in a cult. You just know that you were in a cult. And I
Right.
thought that was so important, right? Because blinders, that's what the enemy does anyway. And I thought that was so powerful. And what I wanted to ask you was, since you were in the cult, what are some
Mhm.
things that people could look out for so
Sure.
that
Great
they'll
question.
know they're in a cult?
So the reason I say, you only know you were in a cult is because cults come in all different shapes and
That's
sizes.
right.
At their core, cults share two things. They all have a leader, and they all start with undue manipulative mind control or brainwashing. That's where they start. So that's why I say no one ever knows they're in a cult because they've been
Right.
brainwashed. Their mind has been
Mhm.
controlled. Okay, so then when you talk about the red flags of, well, how do you, let's say, prevent someone from going into a cult, or how do you help the person in the cult? Well, that's a difficult question to answer because the person in the cult doesn't know. They don't think they need any help. Most people in the
Right.
cult think everybody else needs the help, right?
That's
They're,
right.
they're the ones at the foot of the leader of their God, so to speak, and we're all the swine. So it's really incumbent upon the friends and family as they see a friend or loved one going down this road. And so when I say this road, they cut off all historic communication, Monica. Right? They don't
Yeah.
call, they don't email, they don't text. They stop showing up to Bible study or book club or bowling, whatever it is. And then they have this new person in their life. It's a new yoga teacher, business course, pastor, priest, whatever it is.
Hmm.
And there's all or nothing praise, and you cannot question this person. I'm not saying if you know someone like that, they're in a cult or that other person's a cult leader. What I am saying is those are huge red flags.
So, my question was, so you said you would have these conferences, and it was basically him talking all the time, like the entire time. Did he use the Bible?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. And the analogy I give is, let's say if you miss hit a golf ball by this much, right? I usually miss hit it by this much. But anyway, if you miss hit a golf ball by this much, 100 yards down the fairway, it's way off to the left or way off to the right. Nowhere near
Hmm.
where you wanted it to go, but you just miss hit it by this much. Well, he would read the Bible and he knew his Bible, but then he would give his little twist and interpretation to each and every verse so that 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you were way away from the gospel, what really the Lord meant to say. I mean, there were several times where he would be sharing. And again, it would go back and forth like a pendulum from absolutely brilliant to what did he just say? Where he would, kind of chide Paul or chide Peter, the authors of the Bible, that, they did it wrong and they should have done this or that. And I'm thinking, what is he getting at? And remember how arrogant this man was. He also taught us that he only sinned once in his life. He was a child growing up in Syria. He had been given instructions on how to use the little slingshot his father gave him. He ignored it, accidentally killed the family goat. And he would tell the story like on a par with 9/11 or Pearl Harbor.
So that was his sin,
That
killing the
was,
family goat.
that was his one sin. Yep.
Wow.
It's hard to be humble when you've only sinned once.
Exactly. So, and then another thing that you said that was very important, you were talking about how you didn't have the support of a true church family.
Right.
And I wanted to talk about how important that is. Sometimes, we do believe that, or in some situations when we're going through, we tend to pull back sometimes. But you literally just stated the importance of not doing that and being vulnerable with your circle of friends, right? Instead, especially when you feel that something isn't right. right? And anytime you have to pull away from family or friends, that should be a red flag. So I thought that was important that you said that part.
Yeah, I'll say two things. Number one, I am in a very tight-knit community here outside of Bozeman, Montana. I love my church. My pastor does a great job, but there are things that he teaches and some doctrine of the church that I just think are flat out wrong, and I disagree with, and that's okay. I
It
could
is okay.
probably go to 100 churches, and I might agree with one of them on everything, right?
Right, right.
As long as we agree on all the foundational doctrine, then that's the most
Yeah,
important point. All the other things, you know what? I kind of think God does this on purpose so that way there's a bit of friction. We have to learn to get along and have grace.
that's right.
And it's kind of like a pendulum, right? Like, we should be here. Really should work towards we all agree on what the Bible says. At a certain point, it's a little iron sharpens iron. And then at another point, well, that's heresy. That's wrong, right? Okay.
Yeah.
As long as we're over here in this direction, I think we're okay. The other thing I want to say too is, I mean, you look at how I really royally screwed up my life, right? My wife left me. My kids think I'm the devil. I'm flat broke at the time. I've been brainwashed. And yet, I don't think there was a single person in my community that I went to, that I told my story, that judged me as like, "Oh, Peter, you are messed up. I don't want anything
Right.
to do with you." It was the exact opposite.
That's right.
Tears, hugs. What can I do?
Yes.
Every single one.
That's right. And that's why that support is so important. You know, I have so much that I could ask you right now, but for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of narrow it down. You know, one of the things that keeps coming to me as I'm hearing your story, because you're not someone who wasn't into church. Your wife wasn't someone who wasn't into church originally, initially. And what I'm thinking about is Acts 17:11, when in Thessalonica, Paul was talking to the Bereans.
Right?
And what did they do? They searched these things to see if they were so. So they took what Paul was saying to search it out and see if it was so. However, you added another caveat to that, in that sometimes we could recognize, we can sense a red flag, but whatever our vulnerability is would cause us to kind of, the only word I can think of is compromise a bit,
Mm.
right? Because we're looking at it as, I have a red flag, but this means so much to me and I want to save this. And so in closing, I want you to do two things.
Okay.
Give your last bit of wisdom for people who may actually be in a cult. That's
Mhm.
one. Two, for those of us who may know someone who has come out of a cult, how can we best support them? And then three, I'm sure there may be a lot of questions, whether it's immediately or in the future. What's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Mm. Okay, well, let me start with the easiest one. That's your last question. You can go to my website at authorpeteryoung.com. You could send me an email. You can get on my newsletter list. You can buy all my books. I do a lot of podcasts. I speak publicly, again, to share my story. Monica, I love that story in Luke chapter 8, where the man had the demons and he's living in the caves. He's cutting himself. Christ heals him. And then he begs Christ. The Bible uses that word. He begs Christ to go with him. And Christ says, "No, I got something more important for you. I want you to go home and tell your family what the Lord has done for you." Now, wow, that's a pretty amazing testimony, right? What the Lord has done for you is your testimony. And even though it's a crazy story, this guy was out of his mind, I can't imagine he ever stopped telling it, right? That's his story. It shows the power of Christ. That's what I do. I have a messy, messy, bizarre testimony. But you know what? It really points to the power of Christ. And so that's
Yes.
that's what I share. You can go to my website, you can see all that. Okay. If someone has come out of a cult, praise the Lord, right? The
Amen.
person's already come a long way. A lot of
Yes.
hard work has been done, but certainly a lot more needs to be done. The biggest thing I could say, or the most important thing I would say, is they have to be in a fellowship situation, have to have good communication fellowship to be part of the body in Christ, not to be that thumb, and then question everything. The truth doesn't mind being questioned, right?
Mm,
Christ never shied away from questions. We as Christians shouldn't shy away from questions. And anybody that doesn't like questions is hiding something. Anybody that doesn't like questions, that should be a red flag. And cult leaders hate questions. Uncle Robert hated my questions. And then I think going back to your first question, um, again, people who are in a cult don't know it. It's incumbent upon the friends and family that see it to have that uncomfortable conversation. You have to reach out. You have to take the first step. And remember, your friend or loved one doesn't think they need help. They probably will be very resistant. You have to be the leader to take that bold step. Do it out of love, but it's probably going to be uncomfortable. And it might take several uncomfortable conversations. But isn't it worth it for the friends that we love, that those we love? I think it is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. And for those who are listening, whether it's on the day that this recording drops or in the future, please, Peter will be in the comments answering questions. If you have any questions for him at all, please go ahead, ask your questions. Make sure you're commenting. Make sure you please share this video. There may be just one person that may recognize that they're in the cult after listening to his story. And that's the point. Let's reach that one. Share. Again, he will be in the comments. He will answer your questions. Go over to his website, subscribe to receive his newsletter. If you could hold up your book again, Amazon #1 book in that category. I purchased it myself. I cannot wait to finish reading it. I'm sure just listening to his talk today, I wrote down so many notes, so many comments, just so many things to make myself even more aware of when I see something that, like he said, if I may just use his word, that's just weird. Question it. Just question it. Because what you think is weird really may save someone's life. All right, we thank you. I thank you again, Peter, for being on Cross to Cross Conversations, where silence meets voice. Thank you. If you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Remember, at life's crossroads, your voice is your power. Don't let anyone silence it. Until next time, this is Monica reminding you that where silence meets voice, freedom begins.